that is a dependency on which so many other issues are dependent. So we believe that it has to be looked at with a very close focus of attention. We discover governance from various perspectives, primarily technological capabilities, what could be done in the field of governance from the technological perspective. And here, of course, all the emerging technologies from blockchain to AI to other emerging technologies are super helpful, but we need to understand how to make sure that governance is becoming more decentralized, more transparent, more participatory thanks to these technologies. Importantly, we also think that it's not just the machines that have to be upgraded, but also the human beings. The way the world operated up until this point brought us here. And so maybe it's time to reassess the qualities, the very qualities of the leadership that are required to enact the change that we want to see in the world. We also deal with what we call the new realities, and that is understanding how we can look differently at the economic systems, educational systems, governance systems of the world, because clearly many of them are less relevant because they were based on the premises of the past that helped create them, but they might be not so relevant anymore. And frankly, we're big believers in the optimistic visions for the future, because the doom and gloom that we see around the world today makes us think that there's not much we can do, and we're sort of going into this abyss. But in fact, many of the things that we will discuss here today are actually creating optimism, creating hope, creating agency. And so we're trying to highlight the good parts of what we're collectively building, rather than just focusing on the negative ones. We like to say at reState Foundation that governance is a new climate, in a sense that when you look back at the history of the climate movement, some decade ago, it was not a discussion that was not everywhere. It was behind closed doors, the scientists were really concerns, but it was sort of marginalized. Very hard to believe right now, but it was. And so we argue that the same thing might be happening with governance. Right now, it's a discussion in places like this, in places like Zuzo, it's a little bit of experimentation going on everywhere, but it's not so widespread as it might be, and I would argue will be in the next decade. So for that matter, we need to look at how we can help define the challenges that we've identified as the following. The world is increasingly divided. It's always an agenda of us versus them. And there are very limited spaces where we can try collaborative approaches. Zulu, where I was, is one. Hopefully in Palau, the digital nomads community can create something, but these spaces are very, very limited. Governance systems worldwide are very obsolete. They're based on the past. And if you think about it, we still rely on the international system of the 20th century, Bretton Woods, the financial institutions. We look at the democratic tools of the 19th century, representative democracy, elections. They're all great, but we might need to experiment to see what else they could bring. And we rely on very few things that are actually relevant for today. The global media agenda is only exacerbating what we have right now. As I said, there is a lack of alternative narratives that are more optimistic. And the pace of technological change is very steep, as opposed to the moral development that is sort of staling. And this is the research we have done, looking at 6,000 years of history of civilization. We're advancing very fast in technology, ethics and morality kind of staling, and the growing gap is something that we can really discuss and look at, and it's sort of urgent that we do that. We look at all the ways in which governance could get upgraded. And for that, we've also created something that is open source, and we welcome your contributions, called the Future Governance Goals, much like SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. They are a visionary framework to aspire to get to certain governance principles. And we need some sort of a guiding star. So we've crowdsourced the creation of them, and it's still work in progress. So I implore you to also have a look and discuss together all of these principles that would hopefully make the governance better, more decentralized, more efficient, more participatory for people. And of course, I was already given a sign of 5 minutes. We are looking into some particular examples from around the world of how communities and countries are already upgrading their governance. And here, just some very few examples that might inspire you, especially if you represent smaller and more agile nations. It's really obvious that these experiments are way more likely to happen in places that could afford being more agile. So some of these things, a lot of DAOs are creating enormous change by experimenting with how the participants govern themselves through holding the tokens, through being, at the edge of how their community is developing, but also countries. Recently, Estonia has adopted the DAO for their e-residents. So now e-residents are helping shape that. We have quadratic voting experiments happening very modestly and very humbly, but it's already starting. In the US, Colorado, they're basically experimenting with those. There are some decentralized sovereign ID experimentation going on. About 600 companies right now working on creating different sorts of SSI, but also countries and cities. Toronto, Canada is adopting some of the leading edge SSI solutions. There are blockchain-based land and property records in several countries already. There are supply chain traceability and transparency being adopted in corporate governance and in cities around the world. And of course, the protocols used by Ethereum, where people could contribute their ideas and vote on those ideas and this way enact the governance layer that are participatory driven is a very good example of that. But also countries like Lithuania trying to enact the decentralized governance with blockchain in the very same fashion. There are token-based incentive systems for public goods. There are some climate governance and carbon markets where you can trade and purchase carbon credits to offset your carbon footprints. Barbados is the champion of pledging to become carbon neutral. And of course, Palau with the Palau Pledge is a great example of how governance could become more innovative, but also how a small country could create an example for the whole world that I hope many more will follow. Citizen participation is on the rise everywhere in the world. There's impact investment in DeFi space using NFTs. So the innovation is booming, but these examples are still very few, very few. So I implore you to also be sharing, collecting, exchanging these examples and promote innovative cultures wherever you are, the cultures of experimentation. But of course, I know I'm out of time. Very important that we do not only look at technology and innovative statements, but look for innovative spaces within ourselves. Clearly, if we want to bring about the change that is needed and defy the status quo, we need to look at things in a different fashion. The status quo has to go, we need to transcend the traditional understanding of authority and understand that without safeguarding human rights, without fostering the collaboration, without catering to the planetary needs, we cannot survive quite literally. So this is yet another dimension that we could look at each together. But since we're out of time, I will invite many of you to have one-on-one discussions and keep exploring. But really, it's always through collaboration and exchanging these examples and communities like this that we can, bring about this change that is very much overdue and heavily needed. So hopefully, governance can be seen not only as part of the solution, but also part of the solution of the problem. Thank you very much. And we will.
Anastasia, let's have one question from the audience. Anastasia's work with, she told me she was supposed to present this work in the UN meeting in September, but she wanted to publish it earlier. So, one question from the audience?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I was just wondering, you spoke about changing government mindsets and all of that. What did you think of what President Whips had talked about this morning in terms of where Palau is headed? And he really laid out, I think, the vision of Palau, and I think the governments, the folks, our friends from Marshalls, think even from CNMI, we're also particularly interested in that. Because I think you're right, we do see the world changing. There is a lot of doom and gloom. And so I think there is this sort of search for something new, something that gives us that hope. So we can just.
With pleasure. Well, I want to start with just saying that he's a human being. You know, the president is a human being that you can sit next to, talk to. I've spoken to a lot of different presidents of my career. I can't always say that they're human. But seriously, the fact that he is who he is, I think, could really mean that something is possible now. And in terms of what you're building, again, like I said, agile country, small nation, you know, very particular problems that you're trying to solve, could be a blueprint for others to follow. Seriously, if you can allow yourself to innovate with that boldness and that, you know, intensity, that could only get you very far. Well, it also has a flip side, because if you're the first ones to try something, you may fail, and you may fail again, but at the same time, somebody has to try it, and it will work, and then it will allow others to follow suit, and it will allow others to see that these things are possible, and we need to change the mindset. And so I think it really starts at home, and it starts with you. So the vision that was presented, I believe, is the one that we need, and many countries actually.
All right, I have another question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for a great speech. I do have a question about the example that you raised regarding governance. You talk about one example of the residence ID program, and the other example is the Great Pledge of the Apollo. So speaking of governance, what are those critical steps that need to be followed in order to establish an effective governance? In order to establish an effective governance,
What are the key
what are
steps?
those key steps? Yes.
Okay, well, that would require probably a much larger keynote. But I think changing the culture. Many governments, and we work with a lot. Many governments are very not willing to fail, and the whole culture in the public service is that we punish the failure. So that mindset makes people super cautious. And this way, it's very difficult to do anything that is a little bit outside of the box. So I say everything starts with culture, and then also exploring what is out there in the world. You know, the reason why I showed all of these examples is because they're already out there. Things have already been tested and tried, and they were actually successful. All of this. So what it takes is just adopting the mindset that helps you to innovate more, and use the examples that are already there. Get inspired. And then, you know, of course, who is responsible for what? The people that, you know, make the fabric of this innovation. That's key. You know, if they are willing and able to understand what the society needs, what the people really need, connect with, you know, those people on the human level, that would be also,
Thank you.